Nikki.
Good morning.
I'm so happy you're here. so happy. I've known you for so many years,
Yes.
but I have never really got to sit down with you and have an intimate conversation with you. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for the invite.
And thank you for being here to have this conversation on what it means to navigate mental health, wellness, and what we need to do internally in order to show up for our community. So before we do that, I want folks to know who you are. Nikki Walker. So you were a vice president in a PR firm in the East Coast. As a director of global brand awareness. That is your wheelhouse: marketing, brand, communications, public relations.
That's right.
But then also you served as a director of community engagement and diversity, equity, inclusion in a large tech company. You this year launched NWPR.
That's right.
Your own consulting company
That's
of
right.
communications. And it's anchored in culturally competent communication strategies, which is, you don't find that in a public relations firm.
You don't, and it's the sprinkling of the work that I did for 5 years in DEI that when I was ready to come back to the thing that makes me the happiest, which is PR and communication, it made so much sense to ensure that there were some guardrails in the communication that I would be helping people to craft and create. We are in a different world right now than we were when I started in PR and communications in, 1996? Just decades apart from that and away from that. And the way we communicate with each other and the things that we need to communicate with each other are drastically different now. And so I thought it was really important to have that cultural competence piece because the world is not a monolith. And we have got to bring other people to the table, and we have got to bring people in on our products, on our services, on whatever it is that we're here to offer to the world. We want the world to know that we are here for them. And in order to do that, the communication has to be strategic.
I mean, that's so beautiful because you're really thinking about even the variations of ways that we communicate as an organization, as individuals, in a community. You're thinking about those things that I believe that a lot of people skip.
Yeah.
So if you think about organizations that are selling products, from product to the hands of consumers, there's a big gap in what actual consumers need and want, and what are they looking for when they look at brands. So
right.
I love it. It's beautiful.
That's another blog.
That's another blog.
That's another podcast.
This one I'm really excited about. So you, this year also, same year as you launched your business, you were also recognized as a best-selling author for a co-authored book called Awareness. Put on me.
Put me on. Yeah.
Awareness put me on.
Yeah.
And this is really interesting, and we're going to delve into this a bit too in our conversation. So get it at Amazon, or they have it at local bookstores here in Utah as well.
Yeah, Golden Braid carries it.
Perfect. So this is where the bulk of our conversation is going to be, kind of delving into your whole journey in terms of mental wellness. You also have been recognized for several esteemed awards. So Women Tech Council, Change Catalyst Award, Business Magazine 30 Women to Watch, the W's Collective 40 Over 40, and a Bronze Stevie in the category of Female Employee of the Year. And this is interesting because when you sent this to me, I'm like, oh yeah, that's a Nikki I know. But there's this other part of you that I don't know, and that I've seen kind of emerge in your social and just the things that you've been talking about lately, that I really want to delve into, because this is the opportunity for me to actually sit down and talk to you face to face about those things. So then my first question to you is, tell me a little bit about your mental health journey.
Sure. So Awareness put me on, opened all the doors for me to have these conversations, and I'm so grateful. I come from a family that has mental health issues in there and just in our genealogy, right? There's, I'm African American. I have Native heritage. I have Irish heritage. There's so much going on. There's a lot of liquor involved, a lot of liquor. Mental health and alcoholism they are partners sometimes in the worst possible kinds of ways. So growing up, I saw lots of love and lots of great things. And I also saw lots of trauma and turmoil. And I saw how people dealt with it. And while I was growing up, I didn't have a concept of mental health issues or mental health or mental wellness. So, you don't know. You think so-and-so is mean or such and such is just always sad or so-and-so is scatterbrained. You don't know what these things are. When in real life, somebody is depressed, somebody's anxious, somebody has ADHD. These are real symptoms that we're seeing, but we don't know. We don't have the language for it. And so I now have the language to say that as I grew up, I was incredibly depressed. I didn't know that. I was one of 3 daughters. My mom was a single mother. My mother, throughout my life, suffered from mental health challenges, which... But she's a good one. She's a good one because she understood what was happening. And so early on in life, my younger sister and I were put into therapy. So therapy was not unfamiliar to me as it had been to many of my friends, which really gave me a leg up to be able to start discussing what is happening and to have the confidence to talk about mental health without shame. I think I'm able to do that now because I've been exposed to the things that prepare you to take care of yourself for a really long time. But my older sister had a degenerative genetic disorder called mucopolysaccharidosis. Oh. Yeah. So at the time that she was diagnosed, she was the only African American in the country with this disease. And it was super rare. We eventually found another African-American family who had a child with the disorder. But what the disorder did was put me in a space where I had to learn about disability. I had to learn about equity. I had to learn about just all kinds of things that children just aren't capable of managing, right? But we went into this mode where we just had to do the things to take care of, right? To take care of the family. And so my role became taking care of my sister, my sisters, my older sister and my younger sister. And so I, along with my family, right? But speaking from my experience, I watched my sister deteriorate in her mental capacity from the time I can remember until the time she passed away. So when she passed away 26 years ago, she was 25 years old and she had the mental capacity of a 9-month-old. So imagine, a 14-year-old, a 12-year-old changing diapers and feeding your sibling through a G-tube and having nurses in and out of the house and trying to understand why your sister is not normal or why your family is not normal, why you can't do all of the things that other kids do. It was a challenge. But in that challenge also existed poverty and, growing up in the inner city. And so all these other challenges that we know affect people in the long run were affecting me. I dealt with it as I could, right? When you're a kid, what do you do?
How old were you?
Oh, so this is... When my sister is 4 years older than me. Okay. So by the time I was 4, she was already affected, right? And so my entire life, my sister has been in a diminishing capacity for my entire life. It just was my existence. But what I knew that I could help was money, right? In my head, money was going to fix all of the situations. My mother wouldn't have to work. The nurse could live with us. My sister could have the medical care. So I'm like, how am I going to make sure that we always have money? So I decided to be the smart girl and delved into books and delved into speaking and delved into debating and all of the things that were going to make me a lawyer. Right? All of the things that were going to make me a lawyer so that I could be this famous, rich lawyer and we never have to deal with poverty again. In my childlike mind, poverty was the problem. What was happening biologically is that not only did I have these outside forces against me, but inside of my mind, because when I was 23, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. So what we know is that probably 10 years before that, I was dealing with bipolar disorder and didn't have the language for it, right? And didn't have the diagnosis for it and didn't have the medication for it. And so going through these episodes where you're manic and you just got to do so much stuff. I thought it was my superpower. I didn't know I was sick. I just thought that I was amazing. I thought I was amazing. I would be exhausted after. I would be fully, everything in me would be gone after a manic episode, but I would get A's or awards or create something. And so this is how I decided, this is how I live my life. Now, on the other side of mania is debilitating depression. So half of my time I spend, the Energizer Bunny, but the other half I spend hardly able to get out of the bed. And as I got older and had more responsibilities, I had a child when I was 20, my son Jacob, who is the best thing that's ever happened to me in the world, in my life. But when that responsibility of his motherhood and single motherhood at that happened, it really exploded. And so somewhere around the time I was 24, 25, I was living in Atlanta. And all of these years of being a caretaker, being an overachiever, trying to fight depression, trying to manage anxiety, all of those things came down on me hard one day. I was in my first marriage and going through a divorce, and I tried to take myself out on the highway. And my therapist, I ended up in a ditch. And my therapist is who I called, and she comes to me with her fiance, and they pull me out of the ditch and, call the tow truck, and they take me to a hospital. And my therapist is like, there's nothing else I can do. Legally, now I have to take you to the hospital. So that is when I got my diagnosis of bipolar disorder. And it put me on a new path. I remember feeling like, oh, maybe that means they can fix me and I can be normal. The 20s are hard, y'all. The 20s are hard. So imagining that there is a magical fix for you in your 20s gives you hope, but that is lost hope. But through my 20s and my 30s, I really just tried to find myself, tried to find who I was, and have continued to fight and continue to struggle. But forget all that. When I turned 40, I said I have to take control of my life. And part of taking control of my life in my 40s was really digging into my mental health and seeing what that looked like. And it was messy. Yeah. It was messy and painful. And I think that for most of my life, when the hard thing happens, you get through the hard thing and then you move on to the next thing. I'm very much what have you done for me lately? And it is not an asset to me, right? That's not serving me well. Somebody told me the other day that they can't keep up with me and that maybe I should sit still and just reflect on all of the things that I've already done. And I cried. I was like, I'm not even thinking about the things that I did last month. Never mind 10 years ago. And you're talking about 10 years ago. Get out of here. What am I going to do in 6 months is what I'm looking at. And so at all times, right, we are putting pressure on ourselves to do more, be better, get greater, move further, all of those things. And in that moment, I was like, oh, whoa, mental health check. Like, let us sit down and be with ourselves. Let us remind ourselves of who we are and all of the things that we have overcome to get to the place that we're in. Changes the dynamic of your day, changes the dynamic of your thought process, and it changes the dynamic of the functions that are happening in your body. Like, I don't think people realize the energy that we put into ourselves through the words and thoughts that are always ruminating in our head. We have to change the soundtrack. We have to change the soundtrack. And I've found that to be so incredibly important for me in my mental health journey is changing the soundtrack. I talk a lot, so there's a lot of chatter in my head. And, depending on what it's telling me, it really depends on how I'm able to function.
Wow. What an incredible journey. I want to go back to when you said you were young and you had this sort of part of you that was achieving. The whole world was on your shoulder and you were solving for it. And you're like, I'm going to be an attorney. I'm going to make money. I'm going to solve the disparity and the poverty in my family. If I don't want that to touch me, I want to make sure my sisters will. I mean, things, you said it so well, things that a child typically doesn't think about. Mm-hmm. They're thinking about play. How were the external influences in your life either feeding that or pausing you?
When I think about it, like, my mom is and will continue to be my biggest cheerleader and influence. And, I saw her as a superhero. There was nothing she couldn't do. There was nothing we couldn't have. There was nothing we couldn't achieve. And it's because she whispered in our ear that we could. And so having my mother love on me and push me and support me was really all that I needed in terms of influence to move forward. What was happening outside of my mother, I really don't know. Mm-hmm. When I sit down and think about, my teenage years, my young adulthood, I really think about 3 people, my mother and my 2 sisters. It was us, and it was us against the world. And we were fighting for our lives. We were, 4 women in different stages of life, existing together, all with too much weight on our shoulders, all with unsolvable problems, all with lack of resource to figure out and put a plan in place, right? We're just going off of fumes, off of fear, off of hope, off of all of these things. Like, all of these things are pushing us to keep going. And, for my mom, she was really anchored in her faith. She was a Jehovah's Witness. And that faith really kept her going. I did not ascribe to that faith. It did not keep me going. So I had to pull from something else. My younger sister, she had to pull from something else. And all of us are pulling for my older sister, right? Whether people supported us or not didn't matter to us. And because we knew that we could and would hold each other up. I will say that there were teachers, we all have them, right? Mm-hmm. Teachers that supported us, that were amazing, that I can still remember today, who helped me get through some really traumatic experiences in my life. But other than that, I can't say that there were there was this outpouring of love or support from my vantage point, right? It was me, my mom, and my sisters.
Yeah.
And we had to make it through. And I think that today, that is such a big part of me that it is difficult for me to ask people for help. Right? But that affects your mental health as well. And I've had to learn along the way that the trauma you experience as you grow up, there's nothing you can do about that, right? It is done. You can manage it. You can acknowledge it, and you can move through, with, and away from it. It's your responsibility.
Yeah.
What you can't do with this trauma is let it sit on you. And because trauma will just break you down, it will continue to remind you of the things that you suffered through. It will continue to remind you of the things that broke you. And if we continue to remind ourselves of those things, the universe is just going to send it back to us, because now we're just playing this sad movie in our head, and the universe is going, oh, that's what you want? You want sad movie? I got a sad movie for you. And that is what is going to circle back around to you. So you have to pick your trauma up and you have to examine it. And you might not be ready to deal with it fully, but you got to at least know what you're dealing with. You have to know what you're dealing with.
So when was that moment for you? When it was like, whoa. And because you had mentioned, you had your son in your 40s. There's moments where you're just like, I'm really tackling this. When was that moment for you? And then what did you do to start examining that trauma?
So the book, Awareness Put Me On, talks about a specific experience that I had a couple years ago where I checked myself into a mental health facility. Well, that wasn't the first time that I checked myself into a mental health facility. In 2019, 2020, it was 2020 because it was the pandemic. It was 2020. So in 2020, it took me out almost. I know I'm one of millions who it almost took me out because of the seclusion, because of the not knowing, because of the uncertainty, all of these things. And I was so depressed and so sad. I had never been that sad in my life. And so I stopped working. My job had changed from community outreach to supporting the community by following the virus. The company that I worked for had created basically the best and biggest virus tracker that there was in the world. It was updated like seconds at a time, every certain seconds, and it had the best information. And I was monitoring this tool. And I was in Utah, and my family was in New York and New Jersey, where this, was a huge space of where the breakout was happening. So I lost more than a dozen people in less than the same amount of weeks when the pandemic started.
Wow.
It was horrifying. So I go, I talk to my therapist, and she's like, maybe you should do something about this. And I finally, get the gumption, as a Black woman, and I'm going to speak for as a Black woman, sit down and rest is not part of our lexicon. Take a month off from work is unheard of. But I couldn't move. I was so depressed that my joints hurt. My skin was reacting. My breathing was affected. I started self-medicating with whiskey, and it just got out of control. And I couldn't pull myself out of the depression. And now I recognize it as brave. Then I felt like a coward. I felt like I was running away from my problems. But what was happening was that in that moment, in 2020, I realized it was now or never. I had been struggling with depression and anxiety for my whole life. And this was a moment that I could take to talk with professionals and understand what was happening with me in the now, right? And in this new world that we were in. And so I went and I spent 30 days in a residential facility in Utah, and I learned a lot of things. And the day that I got out of that hospital, or 2 days after I got out of that hospital, my best friend died. It was unexpected. It was tragic. It was a shot in the heart that I had not prepared myself for. And I had just spent blah, 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 thousands of dollars on residential treatment that was supposed to fix me. And then I was back at square one again. So for 2 years, I just moved through it and tried to be the best Nikki I could and just cheerlead for myself. But here we circle back around 2 years later in 2022 because I had not dealt with that. My body, my mind, my soul, or 2023, I'm sorry, said, you're not well. You're not well. And it sat me down again.
Wow.
And it sat me down again. And that's where we get to Awareness Put Me On because, you do the things, you go to the therapy, you do the intense inpatient stuff. You think that you have all of the tools. You're never going to have all of the tools. You're never going to have all of the tools. And tragedy strikes when it wants to. It strikes when it wants to. And if you're unprepared for that, it could really break you. And it really broke me. And I was broken. And so it was spring of 2023. And I called my boss and I said, I can't do this anymore. I really need to get help. And she was super supportive. And I was so grateful for that support. And so it was the best experience that I'd ever had, ever. I spent 32 or 33 days in residential treatment here in Utah. One of the best residential treatment facilities in Utah. In the country exists here in Utah. Yeah. It is a standalone facility. It is not for substance abuse. It is for mental health and wellness, period. Never knew anything even existed like that. And that is one of the things that is a reason why I tell the stories, right? Because people need to know that resources exist. And people need to know that they can ask and they can find. Because without the help of, and I'll say that it's called Recovery Ways. Without the help of Recovery Ways, I would not be sitting here today. I went there for the 30 days. I worked through all of the grief that I never worked through. So my best friend died while I was here. But what prompted me to come to Utah was the death of my father, who was my very best friend. And, it was so devastating. My father's death was so devastating. And my depression became so debilitating that I literally lost everything. I was running a business. I couldn't talk to my clients. I couldn't get out of bed. My son was in college, which was amazing because he was somewhere where he could eat and sleep and learn, and he was safe. I was living on my best friend's couch because I couldn't do anything. And Utah snapped me out of that was probably the most debilitating depression I'd ever been in. And Utah snapped me out of it. And I really believe Utah saved my life. Like God decided this was the place that I needed to be and surrounded me with people who would help me to understand that there was power in telling true stories, that there is healing in tapping into your true person. And, I am continuing to learn those things here in Utah. And it's really giving me the ability to grow and heal in a way that nowhere else and at no other time that I've been able to heal.
so many things that you've said that's really struck me. But what was interesting about what you're saying and what you had said about trauma, in that if it's ruminating, it will continue to ruminate, and the universe will match that soundtrack, that frequency, until you handle it. And you can never really truly handle it because it will pop up. It's basically the way you live, and sort of it's a part of you. But that if it's not something you examine, then it's something that will continuously come up every time, maybe even harder, so that you can listen and hear. And it seems that way for you. The voice got louder and louder and louder until you were ready for yourself to fully do something, or could do something, because sometimes you just can't, and sometimes you're just not there yet.
Yeah.
And I think the way you said that is so beautiful. It's heartbreaking, the loss that you've experienced. But the way you're talking about it is as if you have a relationship with even the universe that's just got your back. It's not that you need to learn this lesson. Mm-hmm. It's that this happened. We need you to address it so that you could truly be who you are. And this relationship that you talk about, I mean, you didn't say it, but in the way that you were talking about the traumas that's happened, you've explained the sort of outer part that says, nope, got to look at this. Mm-hmm. Nope, keep looking at this. And I think that is just, that in itself is hope for those who are going through similar things. Or just because we all have trauma, that just to ignore it or to not be ready, that's okay too. But that it's going to keep coming until we deal with it, and it's going to manifest in many different ways.
Yes.
So I really appreciate you sharing that story.
Yeah.
You had said you, at a young age, your mom, put you in therapy. And that is a rare thing.
Like 7 or 9.
That's very rare. Mm-hmm. And I know, it's funny because my 4-year-old right now, I have him in play therapy. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to introduce therapy to him.
Normalize it,
Just normalize it at the age of 4. And I told my mom and some of folks in my family and my community, they're like, you're going to ruin your child. What are you doing? Mm-hmm. You're like creating problem. And I know that in the South Asian community, mental health therapy is highly stigmatized. But I know that across the board, Black and Brown communities, that mental health is highly stigmatized. But for you, that wasn't necessarily the case because you went to therapy.
Lucked out.
You lucked out. What do you believe is the stigma that you've seen that people are afraid to address their mental health?
Well,
specifically in brown and
black communities. Yeah. First of all, why are you telling those people our business? That's number one. Yep. Number 2 is you're not allowed to be weak. Mm-hmm. So deal with it. Mm-hmm. Number 3 is, what are they going to think about you? Mm-hmm. So, why are you up in my business? Why are you being weak? And what are they going to think about you? I think those are top 3. Like, those are top tier reasons why and aside from the overarching understanding that the medical community really has not given us any reason to trust it. Yep. And we'll just leave that right there. Yep. But beside from that, these other reasons are real. And even, in my 20s going to therapy, talking to girlfriends, like, what do you mean why are you going to therapy? Why you can talk to me. And people don't realize, like, there is a difference between talking to your girlfriend and getting some good therapy and talking to a therapist and getting some directed therapy, right? Yeah. Some informed, someone who is informed, someone who is outside of your situation. That is so highly important. When we're sitting in our mess, we don't know what the big picture is. All we know is that it smells bad and we don't want to be here.
Yeah.
But someone who is away from that scenario can say, oh, you just stepped in something. It's not all over you. It's not all around you. Just wipe it off and keep going. And it's hard to see that when you're sitting inside of turmoil and trials and tribulations. So to have somebody who is professionally trained to help you look outside of that is a game changer. It's a game changer.
And when you were diagnosed, so the words that were used to describe what you were experiencing, was that something for you that felt a little bit freeing, or did that feel like it was too minimal? Like it took the experience and just because those sometimes folks, they go to, therapy and they get diagnosed, or, psychologists, and they get, or psychiatrists, they get diagnosed. And I've heard people just sort of kind of wear that on as if it defines them. And that's the minimizing part, that there's more to you, or it's freeing. Oh, wait. There's a word for this?
It was definitely freeing for me. And my diagnosis came from a Black male psychiatrist in Atlanta, in a Black elevated space, right? So not only did it feel free, but I felt like I wasn't alone, because there was a community of other upwardly mobile Black people who I could be connected to through this Black psychiatrist. It ain't Utah, okay?
Yeah,
it ain't Utah.
And it's funny because when you said Utah is healing you, or I was just in my mind like, really?
Yeah, isn't that funny?
The resources in Utah, we don't find people who look like us.
We don't.
And there is a financial disparity in access to mental health. Utah's one of them. So to me, hearing that was actually a relief to me, because, this actually could be a place to really, truly have the system to help you.
And you know why? Because I built a team. I don't know. That's not the right phraseology. I've been blessed with a group of people who offer me the freedom to be authentic and to be truthful. And those people who are here in Utah are not gatekeepers. And they understand that when one person is healthy, we are all healthy, and that we all need to make ourselves accountable for one another. And so I'm in spaces where when my mental health is off kilter, somebody can tell. And somebody's going to ask me what is going on. That wasn't happening for me in New York and New Jersey and Atlanta. Everything was very transactional there. I find Utah to be a little less transactional. People actually want to build relationships. Yeah. And so that relational aspect of it is the part that really helps the healing.
I mean, and I've seen you, and I've seen your team. I've seen the people who you're closely connected to really, truly have your back. And in some sense, Utah is small enough to create those relations. And I think that you can trust people here, which is a little bit different. So I understand that. I just never looked at it that way. I never thought of it that way. So in terms of social justice work, because you're so plugged into the community and you are so plugged in, and I mean, like I said, you have a team, your reach is very far and deep. The work that you do with community, I mean, I see you promoting local businesses, BIPOC owners. I see you connecting with prominent community leaders that are trying to make big changes here in Utah, specifically around racial equity. what is the correlation between mental health and social justice work? We kind of talked a little bit before we started to roll this, but wanted to get more in depth in your thoughts around that.
Woo, child. So, part of the reason, and let me preface this by saying, I'm just an individual with my own mental health journey. I'm not a licensed psychologist. I don't have any educational background in this. I am in social justice spaces. I am in mental health spaces. And I have common sense. And I think a lot of us do. And I think a lot of the reason that people in my community have higher instances of mental health, not managing their mental health, or suicide ideations and all of these things. I mean, I want to say this. I want to say it in a way that makes sense. And what I want to say is that our mental health has been stripped away from us since, like, with everything else, from the time we got here. My people were chattel. They were not even people. Mm-hmm. So this idea of like a whole person, right? We were not even whole people in the Constitution. So when you take that, just the basis of who Black people are in the United States of America, and you start looping in all of the other things, Jim Crow, slavery, civil rights, all of these things that in 2020 to 2024 we're still fighting for, right? The idea that we're three-dimensional hardly exists. So the idea that we should have control over, respect for, insight into our mental health is like foreign language. So social justice is not just about people not getting beat up by the police. It's not just about, it's about so many things. And one of those things is about allowing people to be their full and complete selves. And the system that we live in has not allowed Black and brown people to do that. And then on top of that, our communities stigmatize it. So when we compound all of those things, we see broken people in spaces where they're trying to fix systems.
Yep.
It is so difficult to do social justice work when you are broken, because the system is broken, right? The system is broken. And all you are seeing all day is injustice. And I just remember 2020 so vividly, and thinking through not only my mental health, but the mental health of the community. And like, how is so-and-so doing? I remember us having DEI sort of virtual meetups where Black and brown people would get on the phone and basically sob. We were exhausted. Our mental health was in jeopardy. The country was on fire. We were supposed to be holding it all together. I encourage anybody in the social justice space to make sure you have a therapist. Mm-hmm. The horrors that we see, that we hear, that we help people work through become our horrors. PTSD is very real. Anxiety is very real. Feelings of anger, disappointment, all of these things are so real, and we need to know how to manage them. And in school, they teach us how to do a lot of things, but they don't teach us how to manage our emotions. And when your emotions are all over the place, you cannot present yourself as a whole and authentic person to anybody. So I think that there is a tie between mental health and social justice work, in that people should fortify their mental health and wellness when they are working in those spaces.
I mean, beautifully said. And I felt like you were speaking right to my soul. And oftentimes those who are leading some of the social justice causes, especially diversity, equity, inclusion leaders, they're women of color. So you've got this added layer of, you have the cultural influence, but then you have this added layer that we are just supposed to be resilient. We're just supposed to be. That we can't pause for a moment and be like, am I okay?
Am I in my own body right now?
Am I in my own body right now? Is there a trauma that's circulating in my soundtrack?
Right.
Is that continuously playing? We just go as if, and honestly, it doesn't feel like we're allowed to even have those moments to step back and be back into our bodies. So
because there's always the next thing that has to be done.
There's another fire,
and solved.
We're relied on.
Mm-hmm. And we continue to show up, and you know what? What was a huge moment for me was realizing that if I didn't show up, the house was not going to burn down. It changed my life. Ego, right, will have us believe that the things can't be done without us.
Yep.
But that's a lot to unpack there, right? Yeah. We can sit it on ego for a second.
Yeah.
Let your ego have a seat.
Yeah.
And let the rest of you take over, right? Let the rest of you take over. Because when I finally said, if I'm not there for 2 weeks, is the company going to go bankrupt? Of course not. No. If I drop dead today, they're going to replace me in a week anyway. So what am I doing here? Why am I not taking care of myself? Yeah. We really have to stop thinking that everything begins and ends with us. And so if we're not there, everything's going to fall apart. That is causing us to be sick.
Yep.
It's causing us to be sick.
Yeah. Nikki, everything. Every word you said. I want to ask you this last question. We talked a lot about mental health and really pausing for a moment and checking in with yourself, examining your traumas. What are some, now as a day-to-day thing that you do? You talked about therapy. What are some day-to-day things that you do that help you pause for a moment to check in with yourself?
So a couple things. One of the things, I happen to be one of the many Americans who require medication to manage my mental health. I take my medicine.
Yeah.
I know what it feels like when I'm not taking my medicine, and it is not nice. And it takes a while to recover from not taking my medication. So to remain in a place where I'm not depressed, where I'm not overly anxious, where I'm able to communicate, where I'm able to move freely through the world, I make sure that I take care of my health in that way. Also, meditating, even if it's for like 2 minutes in the morning, which is terrible. I should be meditating for like at least 20 minutes a day.
Great.
But 2 minutes is a game changer. Just for me, I have a very strong relationship with God. And for me, that is Jesus. And he's my Lord and Savior. And I can talk to him because I have a relationship with him. And so I do. And my meditation consists of that. Those are my morning conversations with the Lord. And they often produce throughout the day for me. I find sometimes that in the middle of the day, I know when I'm going to have an anxiety attack. I know when anxiety is coming for me. And I can talk myself out of it with not necessarily positive affirmations. That sounds so flowery, but it is, it's not positive affirmations. It's the reinforcement of who I am. I have to reinforce who I am to myself often. And so I do.
Yeah.
And so I do. Rather than allow imposter syndrome to take a hold of my day and make me decide I'm not who I am, I reinforce who I am.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Nikki, thank you so much. I want to, I need another podcast episode with you. Thank you so much for your vulnerability and for sharing your story. I know it's going to resonate. It resonated with me through my core. And so I really appreciate you. I appreciate how you show up in our community. I appreciate that you have a circle of people who care and love you. And you're just, you being here in Utah and sharing is changing. Utah is great, but you're making it greater. So thank you, Nikki, so much.
Thank you, Neelam.
I literally adore you. Thank you.
You know, the feeling is mutual.